All right, what a pleasure to be here. I'm Ilan Gur, I'm the CEO of ARIA. ARIA is a startup. It's actually a startup R&D funding agency. And like any good startup, we started out in stealth mode because we really wanted to take some time to build our team and really be intentional about what it is we're doing. We came out of stealth mode this week, both with an updated website and a very exciting announcement of our first set of program directors. These are the individuals who are going to come into ARIA as a funding agency and shape the scope and the thesis behind the programs that we fund. We'll be funding essentially constellation of efforts across the R&D ecosystem towards really big breakthrough outcomes. And if you go on our new website, you'll essentially at the top of the page see two bold-faced things. One is a tagline that says ARIA is empowering scientists and engineers to reach for the limits of the possible. And then under that, another bold-faced statement which says we're an R&D funding agency built to unlock breakthroughs that can benefit everyone in society. Now, depending on your background, either those statements sound really exciting and inspiring, or they sound like something we put into ChatGPT, and then threw on the website. And actually, I'm here to say that we were really intentional about that messaging. And so what we'd love to do is share a little bit about why do we feel like we need a new R&D funding agency to think about science and technology breakthroughs, and what do we mean by empowering scientists, and what do we mean by unlocking these big breakthroughs. Rather than me just sharing that with you, I have the pleasure of having on stage with me one of our incoming program directors, so one of the people who's going to be shaping our funding programs, Jenny Read. And we figured it might be best to just have a conversation. I think one of the things we'll want to do in ARIA is sort of learn in public and share a lot about what we're doing and how we're thinking about things. So we figured it would be more interesting and engaging for Jenny and I to just talk about what we think this is going to look like, and hopefully that'll be really compelling for you all. I want to get to Jenny's background and sort of what she's going to be doing in this program director job, but let me just first frame this question of why do we think the UK and actually the world really needs new ways to fund researchers to think about breakthrough science and technology. And actually the framing is very simple, which is if you look at the story of human progress, it's basically a story of humanity leveraging ingenuity and determination to overcome certain challenges and capture certain opportunities. And that's sort of what moves us forward. And you can think about that in every context, but certainly throughout history now and in the future, there will always be major challenges and enormous opportunities that can uniquely be addressed by science and technology. I would argue that right now, and maybe every generation thinks this, it feels like the stakes are as high as ever, right? The problems we're facing that relate to science and technology are at a scale and complexity beyond what we've ever dealt with, whether that's climate change, biodiversity loss, thinking about things like pandemics that we've obviously experienced, and also the power of technology, and a lot of what's been talked about at CogX, are thinking about these massively powerful technologies that are pushing us beyond scales again, and scopes that we've thought of before, AI, bioengineering. And so on one hand, we've got this enormous demand for new approaches and new solutions and new breakthroughs from a science and technology standpoint. What excites us about ARIA is that's sort of the demand side. On the supply side, we've got an enormous kind of army of trained scientists and engineers across the world, but certainly in the UK, who are the people who have exactly the training, whether it's physics or chemistry, we heard from Matt recently, material science, to be able to develop these breakthroughs. And so the question for us is at this moment, how can we get more out of that talent base to try and address the biggest challenges and capture the biggest opportunities at our time? And we have a lot of reasons to think that there are opportunities to sort of activate that pool of talent. For me, ARIA is really special because there are only a few places in the world that have the concentration and depth of scientific talent to be able to develop breakthroughs in technologies that can change how the world works. And the UK is certainly one of those. And so that's why we're really excited to be launching ARIA right now in the UK. We're going to have sort of a global mindset and scope but most of the activity is going to be here, and we're going to be thinking about programs that can really benefit the UK in the future. Our approach on empowering scientists and engineers is basically starting with this call we did for program directors. And we launched a wide open call globally, and the application started with one question, which is, if you had the opportunity to direct 50 million pounds of government funding to activate the research community in new ways and unlock breakthroughs, what would you do? And we had almost 400 people apply. We've selected 8 program directors. And so let me introduce Jenny, or I'll let her introduce herself. I'd love for everyone to just be able to hear about your background and why the heck you applied for this job.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a vision scientist. I started out in physics. I actually did a doctorate in theoretical astrophysics, and then I moved into neuroscience. I think what fascinated me was the idea that there were mathematical laws and descriptors that would apply to us, to brains, to neurons. And that really fascinated me. And I spent the past 25 years working in visual neuroscience, particularly specializing in binocular and stereoscopic vision. So, we all look out on the world, or most of us look out on the world through 2 windows, our eyes, but you're not aware of that, right? You perceive one unified percept. So somehow your brain takes those 2 visual sources of information and fuses them together, while at the same time detecting the tiny differences between the 2 eyes and using that to infer depth. So I've used that as a model system to what's going on in your brain when you do that. I've also been really interested in applications of that basic science, right? So that's very sort of basic and abstract and how do brains work. But I'm super interested in applications of the science. So how does vision get altered by particular pathologies or different visual experiences? So clinical applications of my science. One thing I've done is develop a binocular vision test for clinical use in children with strabismus and amblyopia. I'm also interested in the applications in industry, so like novel visual displays, user experience, that kind of thing. So that's my background, and ARIA is obviously a bit of a new direction and a new change for me. I think you asked what led me to get involved, and actually my program's going to be aimed at developing novel ideas in robotics, which may sound a bit like a left turn at this point, given what I've said about my background. But I come at that via my work in insect vision. So I think of insects as like tiny little robots, right? They're incredibly small. They have these very small brains that have about 1 million neurons, but they're able to solve incredible problems. And just the list of things that insects can do just keeps growing, right? It's amazing. They can count. They can make complex decisions based on trade-offs. How are they doing this? And if we could understand how, could we use that in robotics? And that's the angle that got me into this area.
Yeah, so one of the things that we found really compelling about Jenny wanting to do this job was, here's someone who is saying, I actually think ARIA should be doing a program in robotics and I should be the one to lead it, even though she's never worked in robotics. And then you sort of look at your background and you say, well, wait a second, you started in physics and then you went and built this really powerful career in neuroscience, and then you've now applied that in different areas. And so actually, we have a lot of confidence that you looking at robotics can bring something different. And I think it's one of the important things we want to do in ARIA is create opportunities for people to come in with sort of a beginner's mind and fresh perspectives and be able to sort of question the status quo around, like, why is the field going this direction? Well, what if you did this? Where anyone in the field would say, well, that's, of course we're not going to do that. That seems kind of ridiculous. And then you sort of ask why, As you were talking about your background, one of the things that I was wondering, as I think about our group of program directors, one of the things I find is that they seem to be people who are very creative in thinking about science, and that's something they're passionate about. But they're also sort of creators. They want to think about sort of the application. So as you think about when you talk about sort of studying praying mantises in their neural system, but then also applying it to looking at healthcare and really sort of new diagnostics, what motivates you more, the creativity or the application and creation?
Well, I think it's both, isn't it, right? It's about finding creative new applications. I'm not sure you can make a division between the 2 of them. I've always been very stimulated by taking ideas from one context and applying them in another. And I think that's what ARIA is going to be all about. That part of the role of the program director is going to be forging connections between communities that maybe don't meet usually, and let's see what we can do when they come together. And we, with the £50 million budget for each programme, we have the convening power to really bring people together and fund the ideas that they come up with, right? So it's not just about introducing them, but then potentially empowering them to do something amazing.
When you think about, the approach we're taking as program directors are starting very much like you, saying, let me look freshly in a space, and over the coming months, program directors will be going through from kind of developing a thesis of where there are new opportunities in a broad opportunity space, and then from that saying, here's a very specific funding opportunity. So you're just starting this process. As you come from sort of insect vision and neural systems and you start thinking about robotics, what are some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I mean, part of me, I'm interested in bio-inspired robotics, so I guess that's most closely related to my immediate background, so that's certainly something I'm interested in. So ideas from robotics maybe in terms of like flight control in drones, you know, what can we learn from flying insects? So that would be one thing. There are really interesting applications. So, for example, we don't always think of robots in biodiversity, but there's some fascinating work being done, and I was just reading recently on robots helping human divers rejuvenate coral reefs by actually planting, seeding the new coral, right? And that's something repetitive, and you need a huge amount of it. So can robots help us there? So I'm really interested in these unexpected applications, perhaps, of robots. I'm also interested in, could you make a robot biodegradable? So again, insect-inspired robotics, you think of small swarming robots, and the whole point of insects, I think, is that they fail a lot, right? They're sort of, you generate large numbers, they're not very robust, they fail, they die, but that's fine because there are lots of them. But obviously you don't want to be like leaving large amounts of robotic litter around. So could we have a biodegradable robot? How complex could it be?
Yeah. I love this. I'm gonna pause because for me, I think a lot of the programs that we develop, the successful ones, will have some insight. It'll be one thing where you say, well, here's something interesting and different. And just as you were talking, saying, well, the cool thing about insects is they're born and they die and there are lots of them. And actually, I don't know many people in the robotics community who are saying, like, the whole thesis of what we're doing is like the insects, there are going to be lots of them. And, those sort of, yeah, I think that's a great example. One of the things that I'll share with sort of the audience here that is both, I think, exciting and terrifying for us, for ARIA, is the idea that, we're built to not try and develop things that could lead to sort of a marginal improvement. I like to say, if an ARIA program leads to sort of a new product that one of the people that we fund develops, or even sort of a new company, that's great, and we'll sort of take the win, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to really create sort of transformations, entire new industries, entirely new capabilities. And we have the benefit of this sort of inspiration from a policy perspective. ARIA was built inspired by DARPA, the funding organization in the US that really catalyzed entire new areas like, frankly, computing and the internet and GPS technology, more recently mRNA, arguably. And when we got our program directors together for the first time, there was a conversation around what is the job of the program director, and this line came out, civilization scale, catalyzing civilization scale transformation. So as you think about developing a program, how are you going to know if it's big enough, the vision?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we may be backing off slightly from the idea of changing entire civilizations at this point. And one of the things that's definitely very attractive is the idea of doing joined-up research. So over the scale of a program that maybe is initially 5 years, I mean, that's a long time, and £50 million is a large amount of money. So you can really afford to think big in a way that researchers typically can't. So I'd really want to encourage people to reach out. And I think, again, talking about the convening power, so maybe you've got an idea, but it would depend on all these other things that you can't do or don't know where to start, but maybe as a program, at a program level, we can solve with that. We can help that. And I think DARPA, again, has got a great track record of really thinking for the long term. So even though its program directors have worked over 5 years, they've had a trajectory that has kept going over 10 or 20 years to really push forward into, say, the personal computer. Yeah. And that's something I really hope we can do.
I think it's a really good point, right? So ARIA was created by Parliament, and specifically there's a directive to think about, sort of a decadal time frame of impact, but also to recognize that, if we're going to make these big, bold, kind of speculative bets on transformative technology, you don't know. When you start sort of a bold expedition, if it's bold enough, you don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail in the early days. And so it's really important, as we've talked about this internally, to think, we should be much more scared that we don't set our ambitions high enough than that we set our ambitions high and we don't make it. One of our advisors for ARIA is Özlem Türeci, one of the founders of BioNTech, the other big success story in terms of mRNA. And when you hear her talk about their story of mRNA vaccines, it's sort of a decade-long journey, and actually really inspiring for ARIA because it went from basic science to thinking about understanding clinicians and regulatory, and they were focused obviously on cancer. The pandemic actually shifted the trajectory of the viability of that technology. And one of the things in the story that you hear is, if you pause somewhere in the middle of the story before it was successful, it's actually hard to differentiate between that versus an attempt that was just as bold but didn't succeed. And so I think it's one of the reasons it's so powerful for us to have a portfolio. We talked about getting the program directors together. And so how do you think having the other program directors, so we have folks with expertise in electrochemistry and computer science, electrical engineering, how does that dynamic play in?
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm most excited about, actually, because the program directors are a really great team, and I'm so looking forward to working with them. And I think it's going to be really exciting to try and build synergy between the programs. And talk to each other about what we're doing. Oh, that's amazing, because that would actually plug in really well. So, for example, Suraj, another one of the program directors, is looking at novel compute technology beyond the transistor, maybe thinking about organic computing, for example. So, if I'm thinking about bio-inspired robotics, there's room for some synergy there. And I think those kind of connections are what's really going to make the whole be more than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. I'm probably going to date myself, but I think about that TV show Voltron from back in the day, my childhood, where you had all the different sort of robots coming together. I think about that when the program directors are interacting. Maybe one last thing that's worth chatting about, and I don't think we've had many opportunities to talk about this, but you and I, so Jenny, in addition to your research, you've kind of served some administrative capacities in the university, including being a co-chair of, I guess, the ethical review, or a deputy chair of the ethical review board for, I guess,
Faculty
Newcastle's
of Medical Sciences at Newcastle,
Medical Sciences. Obviously, so many of the opportunities and problems right now in technology are socio-technological. And if you actually look at our website and some of the bold ideas people are thinking about, whether it's in robotics or climate interventions or neurotechnology, there's a really big obligation for us to think about sort of what's our role as responsible sort of stewards of shaping these technologies. And I'm just wondering, from your experience doing the ethical review work, what have you learned going from being a scientist to doing that work that might help us there?
Well, I think 100% committed to the importance of patient involvement and engagement, and talking to end users. Who are you doing this for? Is it what they want? What concerns do they have that maybe you haven't thought of? What ideas can they give you, right? So I guess that ties into ethics, but it's more than that. It's about involving people really early on at every stage. And that's something I think medical research has got quite good at doing. And I think that's something, part of the culture we want to embed into ARIA. And certainly ethics good practice as well, of course.
Yeah. How are you thinking about this for, as you think about robotics? How do you think about sort of engaging people there? And maybe because we have a chance to be in sort of a conference, what are the types of people you want to hear from?
So you just mentioned the ethics point of view. So there, I guess we'd be talking to people on the street, right? What would you like robots to do? How do you feel about robots? What concerns do you have? From the scientific and technical point of view, I am completely in discovery mode at this point. So I want to hear from basically everyone. If you're working in robotics, or if you're not working in robotics, but you're working on a technology that you think might have potential applications, get in touch, absolutely. I want to hear from everyone, I think.
It's so funny. It feels like you both need to hear from people to imagine where robotics might go and say, what do you want, what do you want and what do you not want based on how you can imagine? And it sounds like you also want to hear from people to say, well, forget about what people want. Tell me what you could imagine at the same time. And I guess that's part of your job, is to assimilate all that information and think about what's something that's bold and new and pushes the boundaries but does it responsibly.
Exactly, I think that's it. And at this point, we're very much in the information assimilation stage, and then later on, we'll focus down more narrowly.
Yeah. Jenny and I talked about the biggest risk of this panel was not that we didn't really do a lot of coordination on the questions, but more that we're going to run out of time, which I think we're getting close to. I will say we have on our website at ARIA a list of all the program directors, the questions that they're exploring, kind of these broad areas. And then as they move forward and do this sort of engagement and really think about the opportunities, we're going to be putting out documents that really more clearly say, well, here's sort of an emerging thesis. We have one of them for one of Jenny's colleagues, Suraj, on the website now around alternative computing. So if you're interested in this area, go to the website, follow along with Jenny, and see when she puts out that next thing. And there will be opportunities to respond to that and sort of inform the funding program that gets shaped from that, which is really exciting. I feel like I've been asking all the questions, so maybe, as we close, anything else to say or anything, questions for me?
Yeah, what would you like people to be saying about ARIA in 20 years' time?
Well, first of all, I think it's the right time scale. I think in 20 years' time, and we have this paragraph on a website which resonates with me, which is, something should have emerged that is globally significant and really centered in the UK, a new technology that's out there in people's lives or a new industry that is just massively important to society, and that there's not sort of a study that says, here's how this was linked. It's sort of causally obvious that it came from ARIA. And so that's the generic goal. I mean, now that we have you and the other program directors, I want people to say, wow, remember that early conversation that Jenny had about thinking about robotics? The UK right now, biodiversity in the UK right now, just because you brought up biodiversity. So this is one example. Biodiversity in the UK right now is, I think, 40%. I learned this at the Natural History Museum. I think it's 40% of what it was pre-industrial revolution. It's going up because we're working on it. Wouldn't it be amazing if in 20 years someone could look back and say, actually, it turns out through vision science and robotics, there was a technology that helped increase biodiversity back up to 80% of what it was. And that actually pushed the frontiers of robotics to create a whole new industry that's being applied, in manufacturing and other spaces. Maybe that's the narrative. Maybe it's, Jacques who's thinking about neural interfaces and there's something similar, or something around electrochemistry and climate. But I hope that's where we end up.
Yeah, me too. Sounds amazing.
Okay, I think they're going to kick us off stage. Thank you all. I'm sorry we didn't have time for Q&A, but we'll be around and very happy to chat with anyone here.